power prices are going up. We are at a power price crisis in this country. You're going to see prices double in the next 5 years.
Regulators are going to control this. This is a regulated industry in 30 plus states. And
the best performing stock in the US market this year is an AI themed stock, but it's not NVIDIA. It's an independent power producer called Vistra Energy. AI, as you know, uses a lot of power. An AI search is like 10 or 12 times or 15 times more electricity, than a regular Google search. And stocks of IPPs like Vistra, Constellation Energy, and Talen Energy have gone way up. But a recent federal ruling has cast doubt, at least to some analysts, on how long the IPP party may last. Are IPPs a great buy, or is it time to bail? I am joined by the two best utility analysts I know, Enrique Abeyta of HS Research and Travis Miller of Morningstar, to unpack this. Guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Howdy.
I've made videos with you both. It takes two to make a market. And I know that, Enrique, you're a bit more bullish on IPPs, and Talen Energy, one of the stocks I mentioned earlier, has risen from like 60 something when you first flagged it to $170 now, although it's down a bit. Down
187 today, actually.
Oh, it's back up to 187. Okay, so my gosh. Okay, so it's all over the place. But today is all over in a good way. Travis, meanwhile, you have said, I think when we spoke, that the market may be underestimating the FERC regulatory risk. And a couple of days ago, we experienced that firsthand. I can go ahead and attempt to summarize in layman's terms what I understand, but I'd like you guys to come in after me and fill in the blanks and correct what I misunderstand. So Talen had a data center that it spun off to Amazon. It's located right next to Talen's nuclear facility in Pennsylvania. They were previously buying 300 megawatts of cheap nuclear power. They wanted to, and it's behind the meter, meaning it's not going through the grid, but the grid is important for these IPPs, these captive generation facilities, because the nukes need to go down from time to time for maintenance, refueling, whatever. You need backup power. You need transformers. You need substations. There are additional costs even for captive situations like this. And they said, you know what, guys, we want to up this load to 480 megawatts without really doing much more. And AEP or this PJM interconnect protested this. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, said, no, you cannot do this. When you said 300, you're at 300. The stock dropped a bit, but that's where we're at now. And the question is, what happens next? And does this set a precedent for other IPPs? Meaning a big question with AI, with data centers, with cheap nuclear power that could go to a data center, or the ratepayers. Who pays, right? Who pays is the key question. What do you think about that sermon? Enrique, I'll let you go first.
Close.
like an 8, a 7.6 out of 10, something like that.
Yeah, maybe a 6.5. So
6.5. Okay, 65 is an F, right?
I thought it was more like 80. So yeah.
Okay.
But let's take a step back.
And C minus on average.
Both Travis and I have been on the buy side and sell side, in Wall Street for 30 years. One of the things that we do at HX Research is we take complex subjects and we put them in language that anyone can understand. So let me take what you just said and redo it a little bit. So remember that a utility infrastructure consists of three parts: generation, where we make the power; transmission, what I call the big pipes, where we send the power to the curb; and then distribution, which is the curb, the pipe that goes from the street to your house. It's a lot more complicated than that, but really generation, transmission, distribution. What the independent power producers are, for the most part, they are companies that own generation, and that generation is free to be sold to anyone in the system. Again, there's a lot of caveats, but that's what it basically is. The transmission networks and the distribution networks, for the most part, 99%, I think, if not 100, remain in regulated entities, meaning they're not allowed to get a market return, or they get a market return that's dictated by the regulators. So Talen, the owner of the Susquehanna nuclear plant, had built a data center called Cumulus Data that was co-located where the Susquehanna plant is. What they did when they did that for the first 300 megawatts is they ran a pipe that went straight from the data center right into the nuke. That way, they actually did not tap into the transmission or distribution of the network in PJM, the region, which is about 14 states. It's 85 million people, 52 million households or something like that. Sorry, 40 some million households. They basically bypassed that. And the idea when they built this 3 years ago was that they were going to be able to get cheaper power that would be more reliable, cheaper because they didn't have to pay for transmission or distribution. We'll come back to that in a second. And more reliable because you're literally right next to the plant. It's a nuke. It's always on. So Amazon came in March 4th and bought that Cumulus data facility. So they bought it outright, paid $650 million for it. When they bought it, they bought the agreement that exists with FERC because there was already an approval for 300 megawatts of what's called behind the meter. That means that they're not paying for transmission because there's no transmission, right? There's transmission, but it's a pipe that goes, I don't know, a couple hundred yards that Talen had built. And so what we were talking about here with FERC, there's a lot of I watch CNBC all day and I watch CNBC all the time. Everyone say, oh, the FERC rejected the Amazon purchase of the data center. That's not at all what happened. The Amazon bought the data center in March. That deal closed. The 300 megawatts of power that were involved in that deal are behind the meter. It's already done. It's already done. What Amazon had done is they submitted an amended ISA. That's an operating agreement that governs this, where they wanted to expand the behind the meter to 480 megawatts. That's an incremental 180 megawatts. The regional operating entity, PJM, actually agreed. They said, yes, let's do this. And they brought that to FERC. And what FERC came in and said was, no, we're not going to approve that. Okay, so you got your 300. That's already work. That's not up for grabs here. The deal's done. Amazon owns this thing. They're operating it. You guys want more power. We're not going to say yes. Okay, right now. But there was an outright rejection. They didn't say for right now. I'm saying for right now. The reason they didn't approve it is two reasons. On the face of it, there's really a third. You had two major distributors in PJM, AES and Exelon, came in and said, this is going to cost consumers more by taking this 180 megawatts and doing this behind the meter. Now, why would it cost consumers more? The reason is that when they figured out the pricing for transmission, okay, and just so you know, and I've got this, I got to get the data, but
yeah, and I want to bring in Travis in a minute, but go ahead. Yep.
Well, so I was going to say the 180 megawatts is less than 0.1% of the total megawatts in PJM. Okay, so it's a tiny piece. The idea is, though, if we pull that out of the transmission pool, then those are megawatts that are not helping pay for the transmission. Therefore, the cost is spread across a lower base of generation and the price would go up. They also argued that reliability would go down because now we took 180 megawatts out of this giant generation pool. And so therefore, with that not being in there, would make the grid less reliable when it has stresses, et cetera. What the FERC said is we're going to reject this because we think both of those are correct, okay? And we need to do more work on this subject. What they really said, and then I'm going to have to hand to Travis here, we can go through the ramifications of this. What they're really saying is this may or may not really matter in this market, but if we approve this today, it could be the tip of the spear, and there could be deals that are 100 times this amount that would matter to the market. So we certainly are not going to approve it on this initial application for the amendment with the incremental capacity. What we're going to do is we're going to reject this outright, and we're going to continue to work on the subject. But just be very careful here. This is about 180 megawatts of incremental capacity that they wanted to get behind the meter. So I'll stop there and let Travis see if that.
So Travis, Enrique used the word ramifications. This is about Talen, but it's also not about Talen, about much more than Talen. There are a lot of Talens out there. Some regions are going to have 7% year-over-year low growth thanks to AI. It's is huge, and power prices go way up in the next 5-10 years. So big tech is trying to get a move on things. How would you frame this? How would you modify or anything to add about Enrique's response?
Yeah, no, that was an A plus
A plus,
somewhere,
Enrique. Wow, wow.
Enrique. Absolutely. The interesting thing is that, like Enrique said, we throw this word precedent out there, right? That this was going to be a precedent. Data center deal was going to be a precedent. AEP and Exelon's, the opposition was going to be a precedent. Precedent. The FERC ruling, the reason they ruled against the ISA was actually so they didn't set a precedent. So I got from FERC that we just don't kind of understand. If I'm putting words in the FERC's mouth, they were basically like, we don't quite know what's going on here. We don't know the economics. We don't know all the details. We're not sure if PJM and Susquehanna can do what they say they can do for reliability purposes. So we're punting. It's football season, right? So we're punting, and all the new football rules. They punted it out of the end zone, so now the companies all have to go to the 30-yard line instead of returning the ball, right? So there were a lot of spurious, and Enrique certainly chime in with your opinion. I thought there were a lot of spurious arguments on both sides, very self-serving arguments on all sides. AEP, Exelon, Vistra, Constellation. Pick your player who was in this. The crux of the matter is the PJM operator, PJM and FERC don't really know what to do. And they don't want this to get out of control, because you're absolutely right. Everybody's going to jump in on this immediately. There's a chance, I don't think as much profitability as other people think, there's a chance for people to make a lot of money on this. And the minute that FERC sets a precedent, we've seen throughout history, that precedent can last 20, 30, 50 years in this industry. So
Travis, let me double click on that, because one of the people making money here is or potentially making money is big tech. And we've seen Microsoft pay $100 a megawatt hour for 3 Mile Island, right? I mean, way above market prices. And that's not totally out of the ordinary. It's happened before, but these guys are betting on power prices going way, way up. For the Talen case, and Enrique, I like your view on this as well, Amazon could just say, we'll just pay a little bit more, and it's okay, because it's not really that much more money we're talking about. Is that okay in terms of the IPP thesis, if big tech just opens up their pocketbook a little bit more? But is there a limit to that, right? Maybe with Talon, maybe with Amazon, they could pay a little bit more now. But like, if power prices go really double in a decade at some locations, would big tech absorb all of that? And if not, who does?
yeah, I think this is a new era of customer, right? The large load customer historically for utilities was a steel mill, a refinery, an industrial entity that had to take power price into consideration to make money. That was a key cost input. That's not now. For these data centers, electricity is a rounding error for them in terms of economics of AI and large learning models, stuff like that. Look at the balance sheets, right? For Microsoft, Google, et cetera, right? Meta, they can throw around double the power cost. Industrial firms couldn't do that. Factories couldn't do that. Manufacturers couldn't do that in the past. You've got this customer now that's willing to throw money at anything. The problem, and Enrique highlighted it, the problem is there's a cascading effect. Because in this industry, you have to equal, supply and demand have to equal. So if you have some kind of demand source coming in and just throwing money and say, hey, we'll pay whatever, right? Just give us the electrons. We've got an unlimited amount of money. There is a cascading effect. And ultimately, the cascade does come down to residential customers. Residential customers, like we see today, have the chance to go to the poll. Regulators don't like being voted out of jobs. Politicians don't like being voted out of jobs. One of the key household expenses for all residential customers is electricity, and you can't get away from it. So the key here is, yes, these tech companies will throw a ton of money, but I think we've seen from the FERC ruling, plenty of utilities talking about it. They have to find a way, they being regulators, they being utilities, have to find a way to stop all of that money coming into the system, flowing down and hitting residential customers. And we being the industry and investors haven't figured out how it's going to play out. But that's the key crux, is how do you stop that cascading of dollars down to the residential customer?
Enrique, as we start to wrap up here, What do you think of that? That eventually, big tech's got deep pockets, but eventually, in one way, shape, or form, there's a risk that this comes down to the ratepayers.
You can't play chicken with capitalism. Okay. I don't care. I mean, California at one point said the prices are too high. We're not going to pay them. And that didn't work out for California. There's supply and there's demand and there's prices at clear markets. So this has nothing to do with what the regulators want, or what the voters want. We have X amount of power demand and Y amount of supply, and demand is going to grow. And therefore price goes up unless we expand supply. It is that simple. This is physics, not politics. And so, when I look at the FERC ruling, I mean, I actually think FERC and the utilities all understand this is just simply, and this is a very narrow piece. So by the way, data centers, 75% of the cost of a data center actually is power. It's the most expensive thing by far at a data center, and of cash cost, it's close to 85%, something like that. Now, data centers as a percentage of Microsoft and Google's and Amazon's, their cost, they have much higher margins. They've got a ton of cash, et cetera. But this is a critical issue. But I see something very different going. I think that Microsoft is paying 100 and Amazon's paying 75 because they know prices are going to 150. And the regulator cannot regulate low prices when you're short supply, or the whole industry, everything gets turned on its end. So I think what they're doing is they're getting ahead of the curve. So I think that Amazon could pay 125. And what Amazon's really doing is they're locking in prices. They're going to be at a 20, 30% discount. So prices in this country, unless we dramatically expand, and we will, it's going to take 10, 20, 30 years until we dramatically expand both gas and nuke, okay, prices are going up. It's just a matter of how fast and over what time frame. And so, I think this has more to do with economics than regulatory, et cetera. And what the FERC is at least doing is they're saying, okay, there's a tsunami coming. Let's just not make a ruling today, 6 months into it, that's going to tie us into anything. By the way, transmission costs are about 10, 15, in PJM are about 15%. Let's just frame Talen real quick. Talen, Amazon's paying 75, Microsoft is paying 100. Transmission costs are about 15% in PJM. That means if Amazon were to pay 15% more, which they're going to, then they would still be at a 15, 20% discount to what Microsoft is paying, which Microsoft is a front of the meter deal, by the way, kind of, because it's a restarted nuke, it's all these weird stuff. But they will pay, I could see them paying 50 to 100% more, won't dent it. But the power prices are going up. We are at a power price crisis in this country. You're going to see prices double in the next 5 years.
Agree, Travis.
At least.
Yeah, my only pushback on that is that, and we've written about this, is that ultimately regulators are going to control this. This is a regulated industry in 30 plus states, and the T&D is regulated. So to get an electron from a molecule of gas to a light bulb, it takes going through a lot of regulators. And ultimately, I think regulators are going to set the pace here. I think a lot of people, certainly Microsoft, Google, Meta, they want those data centers online and electrons there today. Regulators aren't ready to do that today. And I think you bring up a good point that there is a price scenario. There is a price reaction here, regardless of what Microsoft and every Amazon are willing to pay. Whatever they pay, there's a price reaction because you have supply demand. If Amazon and Microsoft are going to take demand off the system, then or supply off the system with a lot of demand, then you're going to have a price reaction in states like Ohio, in states like Pennsylvania. California is a great example, right? It was just the reverse example where people are taking supply out of the system and not this huge amount of demand, right? It was the reverse, where supply was short and demand was long. Now we've got long demand, supply. Supply is long and demand is short. What they did was end up re-regulating, right? And California's solution to the problem was, hey, forget this. Prices are going too high. We're going back to rate regulation. I think that's probably, that's a very possible scenario. Pennsylvania's already gone through this in the deregulated period. They also almost went back to a rate regulated system. Ohio kind of has this mishmash of regulated rates. And and free market. So Illinois let their let their utility go bankrupt nearly, and then almost re-regulate, right? So we've got this history where if prices reach a certain level, regulators, politicians really push back because it is a key part of a consumer's wallet. It's a small part of the consumer's wallet, but it's one that shows up every month. Electricity bill, gas bill shows up every month. So I think, again, regulators and I think investors also have to be very careful about the secondary, tertiary effects of possibly re-regulation ultimately. And there's precedent for that in this industry.
So guys, IPPs exist on kind of the fringe of the Venn diagram of regulation. They're not totally outside the spectrum, but they're not totally in the crosshairs like a.
They're actually, hold on, IPPs are heavily regulated. They just have independent pricing on their power. So someone said to me, they goes, oh, I thought these weren't regulated. I'm like, they're regulated 10 ways to Sunday. It's just their power prices can trade. That's the only difference. They're regulated on almost everything they do. Sorry, one
Got it. Okay, so thanks for that clarification. Their prices move in a leveraged manner much more than an LDCs would, for example. With all this said, Enrique and then Travis, where does your needle rest, either for Talen or for IPPs in general, on overall bullishness? Because there is a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of need for power in the future.
There too, I'm relatively bearish on these, and for two reasons. One, there's a timing issue, and we've written about this, that this is going to take a long time. Anything in the utilities world, if you think it's going to happen in 3 years, multiply that by 3. It'll happen in 9 years. So there's a time value impact, right? So even if margins are phenomenal because of this whole data center thing, it's going to take 3 times the length. By the time you discount that back at any kind of reasonable discount rate, it's pure finance, right? It's worth a lot less than you thought it was going to be. So that's one component. Two, I think there is this risk out there that's not being discounted into the stock market these days, and that's a risk of prices going too high for regulators. I'm just not sure if you think about whatever that cap is, right? Whatever that tipping point is, that power price tipping point, those margins are not very high for independent power producers. That tipping point does not justify the stock prices today, the implied EBITDA and margins out 4 and 5 years. That tipping point is a lot lower, and those margins, the implied margins for IPPs, are a lot lower than I think what people think right now. Because right now, exactly to your point, it's a free market. But that's not really going to be the case, and we have precedent in history to suggest that there is a tipping point, and that tipping point doesn't have very high margins for IPPs. So those are my two bearish elements: the time and this tipping point idea of what power price regulators and consumers are willing to take.
Enrique.
Look, I think if you dive into the financials of Vistra and Talen, you're going to find something interesting. And I agree with your point, Travis, that this could take a long while. I don't think power prices are going to $300 a megawatt. I think they will move higher. They will move higher in a measured pace or a attempt to be governed pace. But as that happens, and by the way, I don't think re-regulation happens in a 2 to 5 year period. It is on the horizon. You can have pieces of re-regulation there. But I was just looking at this. When I look over here, I'm looking at my Bloomberg. Vistra in the last 4 or 5 years has bought back 35% of the stock. Talen just bought back 15% of the stock. Talen's under-levered and is going to be generating double the cash flow that they were. They could buy back 30, 40% of the stock in the next, 18 to 36 months. So, it's one of these things. And this almost looks a little bit like the oil and gas sector, right? In this sense, is that I agree with what you're saying, Travis, do I want to throw a huge multiple on, power prices that are 3 or 4 times where we are here? No, that's a mistake on multiple levels. But a objective person who's been following, as you have and I have for many, many years, would say, if this goes badly, it's probably going to take a while. The prices won't go up as much. It eventually gets re-regulated. But how much cash flow can these companies generate between now and then, because we just kicked off. That was the first out in the first inning on re-regulation, on the FERC rejection to slow it down. I think that Vistra and Talen can buy back 50, 75% of their stock. I don't think Talen will even be public. I think Talen doesn't last 18 months before getting bought out. So high level, I agree with what
for that too. Look at Dynegy Calpine. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the companies that we're talking about today are the amalgamation of previous companies. By the way, previous companies that were put together at the top were highly leveraged at high multiples that then faced lower demand and re-regulation and went bankrupt. Okay, this is what happens in utilities. So, like, I actually agree. If you ask me 10 years, 15 years IPPs, I got a lot of concerns. You ask me about Talen and Vistra, I think they've got 50 to 100% upside in the next 18 months.
Interesting. Yeah, Morgan Housel says, people are just debating of different time periods. We all have more similar views than we think, and I think he's right about that here. Guys, thank you so much. It's been informative. It takes two to make a market, more than that, and it's very useful to get different views because someone coming into this space is going to benefit from that. So if someone wants to learn more about each of you, Enrique, is it daily.hxresearch.net? Is that the best place?
That's correct. That's our free daily publication. Anyone can sign up. We published a 2,000-word update on Talen yesterday.
Got it. And I read it. Travis, just go to Morningstar.com. Is that, and Google your name? Is that the best place?
Yep, absolutely. Feel free to reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with whoever will create the best product for you. Multiple different products at Morningstar, and there's probably something out there we can use.
You guys have a very big suite. I've been a Morningstar reader for many years. Absolutely. And you guys know your stuff. So thanks to both of you for your time today. And thanks to you guys, as always, for watching us at home.